Well, hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Today, I am once again indulging my classic horror niches, I suppose, by finally checking off another film that I have wanted to discuss on this series, probably since the beginning, which is the genuinely groundbreaking, phenomenal 1968 zombie Genesis classic Night of the Living Dead. It's very hard to discuss this because I've seen and read so much about how influential this film is that I do feel like I'm wary of the fact that I'm going to just tread the same kinds of ground that has been covered time and time again, which isn't normally the case with a lot of these. I feel like I try to focus on a point that I normally don't think is explored in a film, or some factor that really has caught my attention. Whereas this, I have read a fair amount on and seen, and you seen it as a case study for so much that yes, the subtext and theming of this has been well documented and discussed. But still, I will try my best, because this film is... The funny thing is, I'm not really even a zombie fan. It's not the subgenre within horror that I'm particularly interested in. And particularly in the modern day, where of course we went through that recent period where zombies were the current trend, with things like The Walking Dead and World War Z. There was a point in which, like vampires before it, and like time travel seems to be now, where zombies were the theme for any kind of genre storytelling. And frankly, I wasn't that interested. I don't find the prospect of them that engaging. I feel like there are certain good ideas in there, and there are, of course, exceptions where I think there is a type of zombie film that's incredible, but that's in spite of the core of it. Not whereas normally if I see such and such is a zombie film, I then have to kind of be won over and go, okay, it's a zombie film, but what else? I think the beauty of Night of the Living Dead is the fact that it's not a zombie film; it's a proto-zombie film. It famously defined the genre, and our knowledge of the tropes of zombies really came from this. Like, you don't often get... I mean, you could say this, okay, vampires, Dracula, you could say werewolf, Wolfman, kind of, although really American Werewolf in London more so. You can sort of go, okay, there aren't many subgenres within horror where you can say this exclusively was the genesis point from which all media in terms of zombies either derived or subverted from. Mainly because, zombies as a concept are a 20th century creation. Predating this, you had Frankenstein is kind of people's understanding of the zombie, and of course it does have its root within African tradition, but the ideas there, and of course the sort of voodoo aspect of it, aren't quite in line with our modern understanding. And of course those ideas and films that predated Night of the Living Dead did take some of those ideas, and Night of the Living Dead of course took the ideas from see the chain of the ideas, but they aren't quite the same. And it's only here that we get this sense of, oh, this is the definitive idea of zombies. They aren't even called that, and they aren't really even zombies as we understand them. What they are, even in the film, in the internal logic of the film, they refer to them as ghouls, which is what they are. Yes, they're former humans who have been transformed into undead monsters, but and yes, they do have the sort of rotting, decayed flesh aspect, But whereas our modern understanding of zombies leans more towards almost flesh automatons, the idea of just the huddled mass of creatures that are driven by one purpose. This film has that, but the zombies are a little more complicated. Like I say, they're a little bit more like ghouls. When Barbara and Johnny first encounter the very first one at the beginning, and he initially attacks and then kills Johnny, and Barbara flees to the car, the zombie doesn't just mindlessly attack the car. The zombie does get a rock and succeeds in breaking in through the window, which of course implies a certain amount of intelligence. Or when Helen's daughter in the cellar, gets, completes her transformation, she of course attacks her with a knife. So they're not the, they're not the animals that we understand. Sort of the mindless, food hungry animals. They do have some sense of, aggression or reason behind the way they do things. I mean, using the black and white aesthetic of really feeds into the sort of ghoulishness. Nowadays, and of course with later Romero films, he really wanted to lean into the rotting flesh, the decay, the sense that these things are barely held together by sheer will alone. Whereas Night of the Living Dead, with the black and white, gives them that more ghoulish aspect. If they had been in colour, you'd expect them still to have pale faces with sunken eyes, to be something, like I say, more like the ghouls of horror literature. But of course, they do follow the same trope, the idea of the mass, and how the zombie subtext, broadly speaking, of course, is about the onset of death and the inevitability of sort of coming death itself through whatever shape that is. And this film really does that. It really knows how to explore the subtext of inevitability. I mean, people are very critical of certain aspects of this film. That on this rewatch, I'm genuinely puzzled by why, for instance, Barbara, who is, frankly, she's a character who, yes, she is either switches between periods of hysteria or catatonia throughout the film, and that's it. That's all she really has. But there is something about her character that makes sense. We think that we would be Ben, or the young boy who gets killed in the gas station. That we would be proactive. But frankly, likelihood is we'd either end up being catatonic like Barbara, or paranoid and cowardly like Harry. We wish we were Ben, though, and of course that's why we get frustrated with Barbara, because we're seeing it through his eyes. And the fact that she just spends the majority of the film just shut down is difficult. It's frustrating because you want her to be more proactive, and then when she finally is, that's her undoing. But I like the fact that each character's death really feeds into something within the narrative. Well, with the exception of Ben's, which we'll come to. So Barbara finally musters strength and tries to help resist them towards the end of the film, and it's only seeing her brother that she's undone. Similarly, Helen is undone when her daughter, who she's been trying to protect and treat, who's been getting sicker and sicker after the zombie bite, which of course people do, this is definitely the cliche defining moment, because of course people wouldn't have known, the bite would turn them. That's a twist in this film. Again, the fact that then she's killed by her daughter is, you see the theme of the idea that, the best you're trying to do still undoes you. And of course you have Harry and Helen, who both die in the cellar when they believed the cellar was the safest place. Now, they don't die because they shut themselves in the cellar, but the fact that their deaths take place in the cellar is that sort of, beautiful artistic full circle. So there's that real sense of going, okay, if this is about inevitability and the onset of death and the idea, in a very Final Destination style to it, that, if you go in going, every single one of these characters will die and it will tie into the narrative, you look at it more like a murder mystery of a kind, like and then there were none, the Agatha Christie, where it's like, okay, how do you get to that point, and how will it tie together? And once you deconstruct it from that point of view, you really do see the fact that, oh, it didn't matter what they did. Lots of people always say, oh, Ben was the only person who did right. He was the only person trying, whose ideas were the ones that made sense, who was trying to whose ideas are the ones that everyone will go, well, that, watching the film passively, the audience will go, yes, that's the smartest decision, and yes, Ben is the one doing the right thing. But if you look at it from the perspective that this is inevitable, that this is fate, it doesn't matter that he was right. I mean, even Ben himself succumbs. And it's the idea that, each of these characters will die, and it's a question of how that goes, I suppose. The other thing I really noticed on this watch is the fact that I've talked a lot, actually, in this last week with the theming from last week's producer Helen's recommendations. Of course, I talked about Dirty Dancing and Chocolat, about cultural transition and cultural revolution. And actually, weirdly, that does tie into this. Because the film at the beginning feels much more like a 50s pulp, cheesy horror. It has that tone to it that I think people could have gone in to expect. And even the acting and the way that it's framed and shot, you think, oh, okay, so this is going to be one of these, classic, like The Blob or The Wolfman, where it's horror, but it's not horror as we've come to understand it, as it's been defined in the genre. It's more that sort of, Dracula, Frankenstein, sort of Hammer or style, or Universal style. That I mean, Hammer itself redefines the genre in Britain, but that sort of early, and then the early style, but then the film transitions, and I think that's what's brilliant about it. So after Johnny died and Barbara's fleeing from her assailant, it switches then to almost going further backwards in film history and becomes more like a silent film for a good 10 minutes of it, where it's just Barbara trying to escape this person. And again, there's no dialogue. If you muted the film, or muted the film and then played music on top instead of the non-diegetic music playing over the film with the sounds of action, it would make a really... You would think it was a short film from, or a black and white silent film from the 30s. It has that same pacing and look and frenetic kind of energy to it. And it's only when Ben steps in that we start to see the film take shape. And the more contemporary, the more Romero style really start to feed in. I mean, the fact that it goes from "I'm coming to get you, Barbara," that sort of cheesy, early section, to 2/3 of the way through the film, when the two teenagers who tried to help and are killed in the gas explosion, when you see the zombies fall upon their bodies and feed on them, honestly, it's like apples and oranges. It feels like those two. If you showed those clips side by side, that you were watching just two different films. And like I say, in that respect, there is a certain sense of cultural revolution. This is the point in which horror was already transitioning in the 60s. Of course, Hitchcock had really, we're in the late 60s now, and Hitchcock is really redefining the genre. And again, Hammer has really started to experiment with its kinds of storytelling. And this is like the final nail in the end of the sort of 50s pulp horror into the more graphic, the more visceral horror that, of course, we will get into the 70s with later George Romero films. So, So that's interesting. It's an interesting thing to document. And of course, I can't go without talking about Ben, poor Ben, who, I mean, as I say, the racial subtext is famously talked about, and the idea that, Ben, who is a leading black character, something incredibly rare in this time period, to have a leading black actor in a when the rest of the cast is white, to be our hero who we support. He does all the right things, gets to the end, survives the night, survives the zombies, and then gets killed by people because they misread. They saw him and just assumed he was a zombie and shot him in the head. And the tragedy of that. And of course it plays into the racial undertones, the fact that, of course, you've got these sort of gun-toting, trigger-happy gang, vigilantes who are going around killing all the zombies. They see a black guy. Of course, the sort of racial subtext at all. Black people have this ghoulish aspect to them in the dark, and all, and the fact that they didn't question, they just shot. And then, of course, they just take his body and throw it with the rest, and it's meaningless. His survival was meaningless. And of course, it ties funnily into, in a really strange way, into Two Distant Strangers, the short film I talked about many weeks ago, and the idea of, no matter whether the subtext of, I suppose, Black Lives Matter and black culture, the idea that you could do everything right. Ben did everything right to survive, and still gets killed. And again, like Two Distant Strangers, it has that same sense of, racial commentary. But the only thing I would say that frustrates me as I watch it is Ben, for some reason, chooses not to say a word. And I sometimes think, if he just said something, maybe that would have been his saving. But that would have undermined the theming of the film. So, of course, that's sort of internal logic as opposed to more, more construct. But yeah, it is a genuinely great film. It's if it's not a great watch, it's defining. You watch it and go, wow, this really does define the genre, and of course puts George A. Romero on the map in terms of this, and he will go on to become, the director whose name is most associated with the genre. So yeah, I'm very glad that that I've decided to sort of just dust this off, because it is genuinely a great film. Anyway, if you like this video, please hit the like button, comment and share the video, because those all help me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos go up. And do check out my back catalogue of videos. I do have many other horror films. I even did a horror week some weeks back, so please do, if you like this, please do check some of those out. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about movies and TV shows. And of course, I share these videos on Twitter when they're uploaded. Thank you for joining me. Take care.